Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So this is session 4 of Beyond Eye Making, and last session I talked about the Buddha's understanding of 3 principal themes: kamma, intentional action; anatta, no permanent self; and nibbana, the going out of the fuel of basically eye-making or renewed existences. And of these 3 themes, the most important one, especially regarding eye-making, is kamma. It's important to understand the whole principle of kamma because the Pali word for eye-making is ahankara. The kara is the same root as kamma. So it's really basically, you can say, kamma that makes the eye. But it's complicated. And it's not only complicated, but it's also very, how would I say, sneaky. Because this eye has been made up, all through history, I guess, through human history. But who has found out but the Buddha? That it's just made up. So it's fooled countless billions of people for a long time, see. So we're very fortunate to have the Buddha available to us to point it out to us, this process. And the kamma is, one aspect of it is that there's not only as far as eye making goes, but when the Buddha defined it as intentional action, I don't know if it was his intention or not, but he had very high expectations of human beings. Because to really understand it, you have to understand intention, your own intentions, and the cause and effect relationship between action and result. So it takes a little bit of self-knowing. I mean, in one definition, wisdom is self-knowledge. It's not, information you've gathered, but it's self-knowledge, knowing yourself. That's real wisdom. And the last session, I told a story about my frequent visits to the immigration office in Thailand, but I forgot to tell you the purpose of it. Got so caught up in the story, I forgot. The purpose of it was that every time I had to go to the immigration office, I had to look at my intention. It was my intention to stay in Thailand, or my intention just to continue my travels. And the lesson I learned was that every time I looked at my intentions, they were different. And sometimes really big difference. When my meditation was going well and I was inspired, then, oh yes, just 2 more weeks and the big breakthrough. Yeah. After 2 weeks, another visa. Or sometime it wasn't quite so inspired. And then I thought, well, here I am, after traveling all this way in a Buddhist country, in a Buddhist monastery, doing Buddhist meditation. When would these conditions ever come together again? What'll happen with my life? Will I ever return to Thailand again? So I just stayed there. That was a safe way. Just stay there and meditate. Don't get pulled away into the world. But I didn't know it then. It was just day by day. And another, you can say, unexpected consequence of that was that every 2 weeks I had to reevaluate. I had to check in with my own practice. Is it working? Is it, is there so-called progress? Or, do I need to change something? Do I need to, maybe my karmas ran out? I don't know what. And somehow I was fortunate enough that it was just enough to keep me going, you see. But some people, they have their one, they have their one big aspiration to do meditation, for example. And unless you reevaluate it, of course, the experience never lives up to the expectation, right? My expectation of enlightenment in 1 month, now 47 years later, well, but of course my definition of enlightenment was off the mark, wasn't it? I thought I would just be sitting there and then suddenly one day, boom, just have the great transcendental experience, and just all bliss and lights and the devas singing to me and things, and well, does it sound like Christmas or something? No, a Christmas party. So, but now I have a different understanding of enlightenment or nibbana. See? So then it's a little bit more hopeful. I'm still waiting for the golden trumpets, so but which never come. And like I say, Kamma is very complex. There's many different levels, many kinds of intention, levels of intention even. You can see one level of, maybe there's an overt level of intention, like, to stay in Thailand. My general overall intention was, to meditate here. But then, occasionally the thought rose, it's winter in Canada. I don't know if I... Maybe I'll stay here in the nice warm Thailand and meditate here rather than go to Canada in the cold. So it's, and we're acting all the time, doing all body, speech, and mind. So it's so kind of convoluted, so complex in a way, that the Buddha even said that the results of our action cannot be understood by thought. It's achinteya. Yeah. So it means that it means we can't exactly say, this action gives this result. I can't say, it's not correct to say, I got a sore knee today because I kicked an arahant 2 lifetimes ago. It's just, I've done lots of kicking in the meantime, so I don't know which kick did what was the cause, you see. But I think the best we can do is if you observe the cause and effect relationships, action and result, your speech and its result, your physical actions and its results, you can see certain patterns arising. Like, in that case, it would be like, kicking anything with aversion is going to have negative consequences. But, so now I got a sore knee. So, but you learn the general pattern, and then, you can't say specifically, even though people usually want a simple answer. I have this sickness or something because of, A, B, C or something or other, but we get a general pattern of it. We can see the patterns there. And this Kamma, not only is it for ahankara, self-making, but meditation is sometimes called kammatthana, the sphere of action. Yeah. So this is a very, the meditation practice is a very skillful field or sphere of action then. Even, you don't sort of get success, but you learn a lot about yourself anyway. Even more often from your mistakes or your failures in meditation, not attaining enlightenment. I learned a lot about my defilements. Wasn't always pleasant, but but that's the stage. That's the step towards awakening, isn't it? You're awakening to the way things really are, not just light and devas music, celestial music, but how I really am. So in order to experience the nibbana of eye-making, the cessation of eye-making, it's also helpful to know the patterns that eye-making is developed in, how it is made in the first place. Huh? Then we can have some control over. We can be able to work with it. So what I found was in my book, while I was trying to find out the cessation of eye-making, here's my enlightenment project still working there in the background. I found that in order to do that, I had to go back to how eye-making is made in the first place, how it develops, how it's made, which was all the defilement stuff. So in order to explain it anyway, I divided it into 4 different stages. The first one is it's not really a stage, it's the foundation really, is the underlying disposition to conceit, which we're born with. The second one is the arising of the thought, I am. The third one is identification. When the thought, I am, arises, it looks around, it's just a thought, an unsubstantial thought. It looks around for something to identify with, to give it some affirmation. And the fourth stage is self-views. Once I is identified with something, it then looks around for views about itself to reinforce that. So those are those 4 stages. So in the beginning, it sort of goes the developmental stage, starting off with underlying dispositions. And this is I would say it's a very profound insight of the Buddha. You don't hear too much about underlying dispositions, even in ordinary, normal Buddhist teachings, do you? Underlying disposition. We have an underlying disposition, we have a predisposition, we have a latent tendency to conceit. This actually coincides with developmental psychology. Every human being is destined to see the world in terms of themselves. It's just the way it is, and it's so familiar to us or so common to us. It's hard to see. It's like we're in the middle of it. You see. That's why it's dangerous too, because it's functioning all the time in our life, but it's so familiar to us or so kind of basic to our way of living that it just goes on automatically, whether you notice it or not. So the Buddha recognized it and points it out and said, oh, now I see it, maybe, if you're looking carefully. Whenever there is, it's hard to, at that stage, it's still an underlying disposition. It's latent in the background, you see. The second stage is when a sense of I, arises. And if you read that scripture I mentioned, you'll get one impression of how it arises from sense perceptions. So sense perception. So, there is seeing there. And then maybe if you set up your awareness at sense perception, which is also an exercise in mindfulness. Remember from last year? Mindful is one of the Dhammas, the six sense bases. Be aware of the 6 sense bases. If you set up awareness there, you might notice, there is seeing. And then a little voice says, I am seeing. Where'd that come from? That's your underlying disposition jumping up. Now it's not just latent, it's not a disposition, and now it's activated now. And this is normal. I mean, don't get don't get too excited about it yet. That's just normal. But if you aren't careful about it, you can feed that. You believe it. Oh, instead of I seeing, it's I seeing. It's better to use hearing rather than I, because there's sound and then little voices. I am hearing. Actually, you don't hear. Your ear picks up vibrations, electromagnetic vibrations, and then sends it into your brain. The brain processes this. And that little I is the ghost in the machine that says, oh, must be somebody hearing this. Must be me. It's not the ghost, it's the ghost now has come alive. No. So the second stage is this, well, I should mention there's different kinds of, the primary underlying disposition is to conceit, but eventually they found 7, there's officially designated 7 underlying dispositions. Maybe it's getting too complicated, isn't it? From 1 to 7, can you imagine that? Just, at least it's interesting anyway. So the first one is sensuality. Well, the Buddha explained it as even a young child has no sense of identity, but they still have a disposition towards identity view. Even they have no awareness of body, they still have a tendency to sensuality. They have no perception of person, but they still have a tendency to aversion. Okay? So, I mean, this is, don't take it personal. That's just, how our genes are set up, It's in our DNA, so it's not a you yet. Only if you engage with it, identify with it. Oh, my aversion, then there's a problem. See? But it's just a cause and effect relationship happening, first of all. So there's sensuality, aversion, views, doubt, conceit, passion for existence, and ignorance. These are the 7 anusayas. We'll come back to them again. But the arising of I is where you can, I am, where you can be more aware, because once it arises, you can notice it. There's still a latent tendency, and an anusaya hasn't manifested yet. It's just in the background. It's unconscious or pre-conscious even. But now it can become conscious. I arises. And the Buddha says, this I am is only a thought. What else is it? A thought. But if you don't recognize it only as a thought, what's a thought? It rises, and unless you engage with it, it just passes away again. So in that discourse, the root of all things, the Buddha says, first of all, there is perceiving of a sense perception. Then there is conceiving. That's the word that Bhikkhu Bodhi uses. Manyati, which comes from the root to think, and it's thinking in terms of yourself. It's self-referencing, basically, to keep it simple. And then there's enjoyment or delight in it, delighting in it. I mean, the very elementary, psychological, anyway, the elementary perception, understanding of it is that there is this sense of I. It's a vague sense of I. And then when it contacts an object, now it gives some affirmation. The subject needs an object to verify itself, isn't it? Doesn't it? Subject-object. If you're just a subject, how do you define yourself? Just a subject. Just amorphous. But then there's an object there, and I see that. Therefore, that affirms me. Yeah? That's where then you enjoy it. Because yes, I was right in the first place. I am, and now I am, compared to the wall. Very exciting. So the first one, in the scripture, they just say, they perceive earth. They perceive the elements, which probably is the very, very first, for a young baby, it's probably the first thing they are aware of, earth, some kind of physicality, before they even have feelings, before they even have emotions, just physicality. Eat, sleep, excrete. So I think that's kind of symbolic of the elements, earth, fire, water, air, but it goes through a whole list of other things. Everything basically that function as the world, everything. We can conceive ourselves within anything at all, even nibbana, even heaven realms. As long as there's a so-called object there, gives some verification to ourself. sense of I becomes more tangible then. Although it becomes more assumed or familiar to us anyway. The next stage is identification, when it looks for something to really give it some familiarity, some stability. And then this identification is the most complex, because then it begins not only is there more complex mental processes, but now it begins to become more stabilized. So there's three things which the thought of I identifies with, three main things. The first one is the 5 groups of grasping. That's a bit more complicated, so stay tuned for next week. The second one is the six sense bases, which I already mentioned. That's how the sense of I arises. 6 sense bases. And then the third one is the elements. But the elements are basically, they're mixed up with the senses and the 5 groups of grasping. So when you understand the 5 groups of grasping and the senses, you got the elements. So just kind of forget about it. It makes it too complicated. So there's the 6 senses, a little easier, I think, and I've only got 20 minutes or so keep it shorter. So I'll mention about the perceptual process, which is in another discourse, same Majjhima Nikaya, in case you're interested, discourse 18. Yeah. There's actually 3 different explanations of the perceptual process. One you read about already in that first discourse, perceiving, conceiving, and then delighting, you see. That's the simple one. But in the Majjhima Nikaya Sutta 18, it gives a more detailed explanation. So first of all, it starts off with the 6 senses. There's the 6 internal senses: eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. 6. The mind is 6th sense in Buddhism. And then there is the 6 external sense bases. Yeah, there is physical object, sound, smell, taste, touch, and thought, or mental activity of some kind. And these are also, for most people, they're happening all the time, even though there's usually some 1 or 2 of them predominate. You're sitting here right now, you can hear a bird in the background, can you? And you're seeing and you're hearing. Well, as a bird is, you're also hearing me, I hope. But there's also a smell, if you give your attention to it. Taste, I don't know about taste. Not yet. There's touch, your body sitting on the cushion, and maybe there's some mental activity going on. But you can use your attention to focus on one in particular. Hopefully you mainly focus on hearing, unless you got a lot of pain in your leg or something, and that predominates, But there's those 6 sense bases, internal and external, and then there's contact. There can be an eye, physical eye, and there can be an object there. But if my eye doesn't contact it, nothing happens. There's nothing beyond that. There has to be contact. And this maybe sounds a little bit, obvious, contact, but it's plays a very significant role in the Buddhist psychology. So when those 3 come together, the internal sense, the external sense base, and the contact, you have knowing, vijnana. And it's usually translated as consciousness, but for detailed processes, if you want to look in detail, what's consciousness? It's so vague, and so I think psychologists still argue what is consciousness. I mentioned sometime I came across a book when I was in Thailand called Consciousness Explained, really thick like this. That's what I need to do. I need to understand consciousness. So read this whole book, and it was the writer was very, very good writer. got to the end of it and I was even more confused. Apparently, I'm not the only one, because I read a review about it and it said, somebody said it should be called Consciousness Complicated or something, or Consciousness Confused or something. But he comes out, he kind of has his own definition of consciousness, and then he comes up with the conclusion that computers are conscious. Well, that's not the Buddhist view of consciousness, so so I mean, still it's a little bit, uncertain. But I mean, vijnana in Buddhism is defined very, very simply. It's just the knowing of sense impression, sense contact. That's all it is. There's no understanding what it is. That's sanya. Sanya gives a label to it. This vijnana just knows, there is sight. That's it. Quiet. Just sight. Seeing. It's all vijnana knows. And then there is feeling. Automatically, feeling comes after knowing. I mean, okay. And those two, knowing and feeling, are automatic. They just happen. There's no control, if you like, over them, unless you withdraw contact. But it's just automatic. They just happen. Then from feeling, there is sanya. And sanya is a special, I explain it more in detail in the 5 groups of grasping, but sanya is sa jnana. Jnana is knowledge, and sa means together. So it's an associative knowledge. Vijnana is a discriminating knowledge, V separating. And it was vijnana that, at least in the Hindu system, where vijnana differentiated between subject and object, brought duality from nothing to something. But in Buddhism, it just is bare knowing, just knowing that there is something, that there is some sense contact that's happened. Then feeling happens, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. It's just like a bit like an instinct. I mean, it's, when there is some knowing of something, there is, how do you feel about it? You can say that feeling, and the word for feeling, Vedana, is the same root as vijnana. It's knowing of some kind. But you can say feeling is the emotional side of knowing. There's the intellectual, if you like. I mean, the Buddha doesn't divide things like that, emotional and intellectual, but there's hedonic tone. I don't know what to say. It's how you feel about it and what you know about it. There's knowing, and then there's some kind of feeling about it. Just pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. Then there is sanya, which I define as recognition, because this associated knowledge needs something to associate with. So it associates through memory. When I see this black box here, first of all, it's just, all the vijnana sees is color and shape. It's all I can see there. The eye just sees color and shape. Then the conscious vijnana says, "Oh, seeing," and then, okay, neutral feeling, or it's already half time, so I better hurry up. Unpleasant feeling. If I look at the numbers, if I just look at the box, black box, it's neutral. And then sanya, the association, says, what is that? Oh, square boxes, with numbers on them, probably is a clock. But it might be a shoebox. That's also a square box, right? So maybe it's a recording device, I don't know. But I think my first association was correct. But I don't know. I just have to go with the flow of it, Just assume it's correct until it's proved otherwise. And then after this recognition, then there is thinking, vitaka, some kind of thought. You see that and you think, oh, I wonder if that clock is right. I wonder if that's the correct time or not. I wonder where that clock is made. I mean, if I wasn't paying attention to what I'm saying. After thinking, there is something called Papancha. And Papancha is a little bit, there's a whole, you can say a whole study of it as a separate theme, but it's basically, once there is thinking, then it can trigger off an elaboration or a proliferation of thinking. You can just go on. If I'm not really attentive or don't have mindfulness, that's a nice clock. I wonder where you can get that. Can I get two of them? I want another one. And just goes around and around, And it's like, oh, wait a minute. It's only a clock. It's not even nice color. After Papancha, then it takes off. It's called then there's a whole flood of perceptions and concepts from this elaboration. So I'm sure we're all familiar, as meditators, with that possibility, right? Yeah, there's thinking, and then there's a few, proliferation of thoughts, and then you're back somewhere else on a different planet somewhere. different time zone and all the rest of it, So this is kind of a general, detailed perceptual process, but important to know that the first part of it, we have the senses, so it's just, you can't just shut them off. You have to work with them. And then there is this knowing, and there is feeling, which happen also automatically. But when it comes to sanya, thinking, and papancha, that's when there is some self-involvement in it. We all have our own particular associations, our own sanya, right? Somebody else sees that, and they don't see a clock. They see something totally different, because they don't have any reference to it, maybe. And then the way they think about it, they think, oh, if they do recognize it as a clock, then how much does it cost? I wonder if I can sell that somewhere and get a bit of extra money to buy some chocolate. They go in a different tangent when they think, you see. And same with papancha. But after this papancha, the next part of it is you become just a victim. You have no self-control over it anymore. As soon as this proliferation starts, endless, they take you over. And you just get caught up with it. And, most of the time they are involved with yourself somehow. There's some self-involvement in it. And so they end up just kind of perpetuating your self-delusions, if you like. So to go through these, the contact is important. I mean, it doesn't sound so important or sound so obvious, right? There's the organ, there's a sense organ, then there's an object, and then there's contact, yeah. But the point of view of especially meditation practice, spiritual practice, if you change this contact, for example, if you know what is skillful to put your attention on, then it changes the whole thing. If you know that, okay, looking at expensive clocks is going to stir up greed, not so skillful. Yeah. So don't bother looking at, you can alter the contact. Basically, it says there's no experience without contact. So contact is like a little bit of a filter, like a channel towards your experience, you see. So, for example, if you take up a meditation object, a skillful one, practice of metta, for example, you could, take up meditation on aversion, right? There isn't one in Buddhism, but I mean, some people do anyway, whether they like it or not. Some memory of some, unpleasant person or incident comes up, and then you start to be spun off by it. And then it just compounds your aversion. One of the think Dhammapada verses was, if you think about, they abused me, they hurt me, they, whatever, they caused me pain or something, you keep up those thoughts, they just get more and more ingrained, they get more and more built up, they get more and more energized, and you're in a rage then. But if you have a skillful meditation object, skillful something to contact, put your mind on, metta, forgiveness, friendliness, then it changes your whole state of mind, doesn't it? Changes your whole train of thought. Then, if you, unless you have very good meditation and it's can stay away from thinking, stay with just the feeling of metta, doesn't go into the sanya, the thinking, then it creates a very skillful environment, mental environment. When the Buddha was at that contact, and when it comes to thinking now, when the Buddha was still a bodhisattva, before he was enlightened, he also was struggling in his spiritual practice, and then he began to notice the different kinds of thoughts that arose, and he noticed 3 kinds of thoughts: sensuality, ill will, and cruelty were very, very detrimental. So he said his conclusion was they lead to one's own affliction, right? You think about ill will or sensuality or cruelty, does it make you feel good? Well, maybe sensuality for a minute, for a while. But eventually you get disappointed again with it. It doesn't live up to your expectations. It leads to others' affliction, especially, ill will and cruelty lead to others' affliction. Like I said, it can build up, and before you know it, you're out of control. You're down the lane of conceptual proliferation and can't control it anymore. And then you just, you lash out to people or something. And they lead to the affliction of both, yourself and other people too, in any kind of interaction. It obstructs wisdom. When you're overtaken by these passions, sensuality, ill will, cruelty, obstructs wisdom, causes vexation, and leads away from nibbana. So that was Buddha's experience. Whereas the other ones, renunciation, non-ill will, and harmlessness, they lead in the opposite direction. They lead towards nibbana. You recognize what these thoughts are? The Buddha designated them as right aspiration in the Eightfold Path. Yes, right thought, right aspiration. Yeah. Sama sankappa. So that's why they were so important. I mean, the Buddha discovered this before his awakening. Recognize, this is important for mental training. So this is part of the Eightfold Path. Then it'd be helpful to have it part of the Eightfold Path. So that's when it comes to thinking. And then we have some control over it still. We have some control over sanya. It's partly, through our own initiative, our own, say, intentional actions. As far as sanya goes, like for a sanya, sometimes a sanya was not just perception, like you say, passive perception, but it's also used in the scriptures as a good idea, a good concept to reflect upon. So, like when Girimananda was sick, the Buddha said to Ananda, give him these 10 perceptions. 10 perceptions, which there is. I don't know if you recite them or not. I think they're in the chanting book.
Not in the big one, but in the big
Okay, yeah. Perceptions of anicca, dukkha, anatta, but there's 10 of them altogether. Asubha, and Girimananda, he was sick, so the Buddha told Ananda to give him these 10 perceptions. So, and they were so powerful when he reflected upon them that he got up from his illness and walked away and lived happily ever after. I think he even became an arahant, I think, even. So very powerful perceptions, you see. And that's what the Buddha gave a few times he gave these particular, say, reflections or contemplations or ideas, skillful ideas. when you contemplate them, they lead to a more skillful way of thinking. And the thinking, sometimes if it goes to elaboration, at least it's going in the right direction. That was one of the reasons why I started work, or I did do work on these various books, because it was, helpful to have a theme, a Buddhist theme to contemplate. And then afterwards, it comes up in my mind, through the course of the day. Oh, yes, right, yeah. I'm making, yeah, oh, there it goes again, yeah. But if you maybe you don't have those skillful perceptions in your mind maybe goes back to your old memories, the old memories of, when I was a layman. It was so long ago, I can't remember now. But then I did remember a few times when I tell that story about going to the immigration office in Thailand, and other stories came up about other immigration offices. but by just reflecting upon the Buddhist scriptures, for example, these particular themes, it keeps fresh in your mind and it gets renewed again. And that's a skillful way to think. Yeah. Otherwise, your thinking tends to go back to, say, worldly attitudes. But one of the important things to remember about the sense perception is that these senses are very unreliable. It's a very, very profound insight already. Most people, they think what they see, hear, smell, taste, and touch is the absolute reality. It's called naive realism. They believe they're seeing the real world out there, wherever they go. Yeah? But the Buddha is saying, all you're seeing is distortions, folks. Sorry. It's simply delusion. You're seeing us. You're seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. It's not the way things really are. Huh? For example, just an example. Our sight. We think we're seeing reality here. I mean, even a possum sees more than we do, right? A possum can see at night. Huh? That sort of we think is a dumb animal can see more than we can. And we're so proud of our vision, Hearing, your vision is only limited to a very, very narrow frame, narrow range of electromagnetic vibrations. You can't see infrared, you can't see ultraviolet, But so I think we see reality. Hearing, you think we hear things. Oh yes, I'm hearing the way things are. The dog can hear other higher sounds than we can. I don't know about birds and everything else, but I mean, at least the dogs can hear. Smell too. The dog can smell a lot more than we can. But we don't recognize the limits of our own senses. So when you recognize that, you think, oh, gee, I don't trust this perception so much. It's just perceptions. Then we draw conclusions and make associations, and especially traveling to foreign countries, and they go into a place like Thailand, which was quite, I never was in the tropics before. Thailand was the first country in the tropics, really. So it was a totally different environment. I was in a temperate rainforest in Canada, not a tropical rainforest. So all the different plants and different animals, and it was sometimes it was just mind-boggling. I had to learn a whole new system of perception then, of memory and association, and learning learning about the snakes, for example. Yeah, that's what keep people awake, right? Snakes. We have snakes in Canada, but most of them are harmless. Yeah. I used to play with them, actually. Little green garter snakes. I used to play with them. But then you go to Thailand, and let's see now. they got cobras, and they got banded crates, and you got to recognize which ones are dangerous, which one you can play with. Most of them you don't play with. Yes. and just having different experiences. Like I remember going in India, and I went to the market one time, and I found there was this strange fruit there, quite a big yellow fruit. That's really strange, but it looks interesting. I'll try it. So I bought it, went back to my camping place, and I had this. It was delicious. Oh my goodness, mouth-watering, delicious. So I came back the next day to the market, and I asked the man for. He said, "Finished. Season's over." So it wasn't until next year, next May or something, rather, or April, I came across it again in the market, and there was hundreds of them. There were mangoes. First time I ever tasted a mango, and then they said it was the end of the season. I couldn't. I was all set up with this, delicious, and then there's no more till next season. Or in Thailand, I got a mangosteen. You know, mangosteen? Well, you know, of course. but I didn't know what it was. What's this funny thing? This hard red, at least looks like a tomato, or a tomato. You know, so I didn't know what to do with it, but I tried again, so I just bit into it. Yes. That was not delicious. For those who don't know, the outside of it is really bitter. It's a very thick, hard red and very bitter cover on it. You have to open it up and get the inside. It's a very, very delicious white fruit. So very different experiences, you know. But I had just had no association. I didn't know what it was, you know. But you know, when you recognize, okay, these are just, you know, don't take the world so seriously. You know, they're just perceptions. You know, and the senses are unreliable. Your own conclusions are unreliable. So, you know, you have to be careful about believing in them. Then, so once we understand that, we get some understanding of this, the sense processes, the perceptual process. And then, you know, an exercise you can try is, you know, as with the exercise in mindfulness, to set up awareness in the perceptual process. So you can try it out. You know, just, you know, well, it's easier maybe when you're sitting meditation. You know, just put your attention to hearing, and you notice, you know, when there is sound, you notice a little eye jump in. Oh, I'm hearing that bird again. That bird is always squawking like that. You know, it's that Wapasala, right? The friarbird, the yappy friarbird. She came and said it's still back there sometimes. Yeah. Or you just hear some sounds. There's quite a few birds here, so oh, that's very pleasant. Yeah. What does it do to you? Your body relaxes. Your body gets more tense. Even you don't know the name of it, but just be with the sound. Yeah? And sometimes you can just be with the sound, with the hearing, and there's no sense of a self jump into it. Say, I am hearing, you know, and then I blocks out the sound, right? You aren't hearing anymore. You're talking to yourself about yourself. You're talking to yourself. Oh, I like that. Amazing. Last time I heard the same old story again. But if you just stay with the sound, hearing, it's unique. That's end of story. Yeah? Your mind can stay calm. So I mean, it's an exercise you can try. You know, even you're walking around sometime, just be with the seeing. Just seeing. The I am, you know, I am seeing, or I am, you know, seeing something I like or dislike. It's all extra. It's all extra. It's just a thought. So then when you understand that, you know, you can learn to let go of the I-making process. Learn to kind of disengage it, take away the energy of it. Otherwise, it's just going on all the time. You know, here you are living in your little world. You know, I think I know what's happening. I see the world. I see the universe. You know, I am the universe. It's a very, very small universe you're seeing, I'm afraid. So there's the third stage, as I mentioned, is identification. So the three things, 6 senses, and the more important one is the 5 groups of grasping. This is where it gets a little bit internalized. And these 5 groups of grasping, and you say in the Buddhist time, they're probably well known because there's not really clearly explained. But these days, they aren't so commonly explained and familiar with. And maybe some of them are, like feeling. Yeah, but people identify with feeling happy, feeling sad, feeling good or bad or whatever. But it's helpful to know the whole range, because these are just functions of life. They're just automatic functions. But we identify with them and try to own them, then it gets complicated. So next time I'll explain about these, and I have my own particular definition of them, so bring your notebooks. No. Hopefully it'll make sense, so you can recognize what they are, because sometimes they can seem so, I don't know, abstract or complicated or something, like Buddhist jargon or something or other. They just, oh yeah, right, the 5 groups of grasping, yeah. You probably recite them every morning, right? Yeah. 5 groups of grasping is part of the morning chanting. Yeah? No, 5 groups of grasping. Oh yeah. Yeah. Rupang, Anichang, Rupang, Anatta. Yeah. It's better to, I don't know, sometimes it's better to keep in Pali, because the translation is not always correct. Yeah. Good English. Oh, okay. It's not my translation. It can't be correct. Maybe close enough. Yeah. Yes. So after identification, then that's a big topic, identification. And then there is the self views, the views about the self. And then after that, then we go into the cessation of I-making. Then it's basically reversing the process, how to deal with self views, how to deal with identity, and that's the greater part of the book. So hopefully we got some time. It's only 4. I got 6 more sessions, right? At least. May have to put a few extra in. But so at the end of it, into the Vasa, you should be very aware of the cessation of I-making. You can't go back to the world then. Yes. Okay, that's enough. I think enough for today. Hopefully it wasn't too much mental activity.